need any help.
Really?
It's kind of interesting that a movie set in the late 1800s, featuring three of the most famous movie monsters from the 1930s and 40s, battling the most famous vampire hunters in all of fiction, somehow becomes one of the most 2004 films to be released. I mean, the movie is starring Hugh Jackman because it was 2004, starring alongside Kate Beckinsale because it was 2004, and it's got Richard Roxburgh as Dracula, who is the most 2004 actor you could get to portray an early 2000s villain. Produced by Universal Pictures, 2004's Van Helsing is an action-adventure horror film that follows monster hunter Van Helsing traveling to Transylvania to battle three of the most iconic movie monsters in cinema, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula. Guess it was time for Universal Pictures to pull the crossover lever in May of 2004. But with that being said, I'm Azza the Pop Culture Viking, and with spoilers ahead, let's take a pop culture look into Van Helsing.
Now that I have your attention.
So, if you're wondering how Universal managed to pay for the rights to get multiple characters from the most famous horror novels in history, that's because Universal owns the rights to those characters since the early 1900s. So Universal Pictures created a new series of horror films called Universal Studios Monsters that started between 1913 till 1956. The series of classic horror movies started with the 1913 film Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which kicked off the horror movie monster genre, which included films like The Phantom of the Opera, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Mummy. But the studios would hit big with three of the most popular and successful films, which were Dracula 1931, Frankenstein 1931, and The Wolfman in 1941. It wasn't until the 90s that the popularity of the Universal monsters resurfaced thanks to VHS and special editions of the classic films. This led to Universal Pictures taking on the idea of bringing on a modern reimagining of the classic monster films with updated film equipment, which would start with 1999's The Mummy, which was a massive success. By the way, if you want me to do a Mummy episode, I would totally do it because I bloody love this movie. Universal Pictures wanted to reinvent their iconic movie monsters and wanted to replicate the formula that had worked with both The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. Stephen Sommers was brought on board as a director thanks to the first two Mummy films, but the studios were aiming for a release date of May of 2004, which was 5 years to the date after The Mummy opened in 1999. The Mummy took the classic monster in an action-adventure tone, which the studio thought it made sense to do the same thing with Van Helsing. While The Mummy was very much inspired by Indiana Jones, Van Helsing drew heavily from the James Bond films. I think I can see the part where they dropped it and now it's broken. Oh, don't worry, we'll get to that. Let's talk about the cast. We got Hugh Jackman as Gabriel Van Helsing, which ironically he was considered to play the Phantom in the 2004 adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera, but had to turn it down due to scheduling issues with Van Helsing. Actually, can someone please make that f***ing movie? I would crawl through glass just to see a Hugh Jackman-led Phantom of the Opera film. Kate Beckinsale as Anna Valeris, Richard Roxburgh as Count Dracula, who was very keen on the role as he loved the old Universal monster films, David Wetham as Carl. There's actually quite a few Australian actors in this movie. Charlotte Hensel as Frankenstein's monster, Kevin J. O'Connor as Igor, who actually played Benny in The Mummy 1999, Will Kemp as Valken Valeris, and along with Elena Anya, Sylvia Kolliker, and Josie Moran as Dracula's brides. Stephen Sommers wrote the idea of Van Helsing while thinking of a completely different film. He stated he was having fun writing, but he didn't think he would be able to direct it because he would have made it hard to make. Sommers thought about the original Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman films on how great the stories are, but how he would do them differently while keeping them scary. But out of the three monster movies, the only character Sommers found interesting was Van Helsing. Sommers always found that the character of Van Helsing was in heaps of horror films played by multiple actors, but was always a minor role. The idea to bring an updated Van Helsing to the modern audience was to make him younger, cooler, and more fun. Hugh Jackman saw Van Helsing as not always a bad guy, but he's definitely a good guy that doesn't go by the books, which is due to when he kills monsters and then they turn back into humans, which gets him in trouble with the law and the Vatican. Jackman even compared the character to other film characters like Dirty Harry, Mad Max, and Indiana Jones. Meanwhile, the character of Anna Valeris is equal to Van Helsing, but she knows that she needs help as she's the last of her family in the bloodline, otherwise Dracula and his brides could take over the world. And Dracula was written to be up to date with the modern day, where Richard Roxburgh took the opportunity to do his own thing to make Dracula new and refreshing. Prop master Steve Milton was brought on board to help reinvent Van Helsing's weapons. Now, because the character is from the olden days, he normally has things like holy water, crosses, and wooden stakes. This time around, however, Van Helsing basically played Monster Hunting Call of Duty to get the best weapons loadout he could get. Some of the weapons ranged from retractable silver stakes, which is basically a switchblade, foldable crosses, a bloody grappling hook, cause why not, throw a bit of Batman in there, some weird hand grenade which sounds like something that would be used in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, shotguns and handguns, but they fire different rounds of ammo like silver bullets, nitrate, and regular brass bullets for regular people. Guess Van Helsing might be a murderer. Tojo blades, which basically gives Van Helsing buzzsaws for hands. Definitely the most famous and marketed weapon used in the film is the automatic crossbow, which was described as a machine gun for crossbows for hunting vampires. All of which provided by Carl the Friar, who was Van Helsing's chauffeur and basically his quartermaster. Because you know, Van Helsing is the James Bond of monster hunting. Filming locations were a combination of sound stages and on-set locations. Alan Cameron worked on the sets of Van Helsing, which was his 5th collaboration with Stephen Sommers. The sets were taken to the next level with places like Transylvania, Dr. Frankenstein's lab, and Dracula's castle. The team created 3 different labs for the Vatican workshop, which the stage measured 150 to 200 feet, but also doubled the length of it by using mirrors. Even the sets involving Dracula's castle were a combination of sound stages and bigatures. The village in Transylvania was filmed in Prague, Czech Republic, with houses that were crooked in design and using equipment not used before to make the shooting as organic as possible, which involved wire work where the riggings measured approximately 2 football fields with around 15 wires stretched from the riggings. The cameras were basically let loose to mimic the POV shots of the brides, and all the extras were basically told to just run around like maniacs around the set, where Hugh Jackman accidentally knocked over 15 people in 4 takes, including shoulder charging a 60-year-old extra, which I could picture going a little something like this. A lot of the actors and actresses did their own wire work. Hugh Jackman was flung about 30 to 40 feet in the air for the Notre Dame scenes, and was also flung around during the carriage scenes where Hugh Jackman not only lands on his back, but also was dragged along the ground where the soles of his shoes were completely ripped off, and if he had let go of the carriage, he would have been ran over from the horse carriage. Sweet Jesus Christ! Even Kate Beckinsale landed on Hugh Jackman during a wirework scene after the shot was taken, but the actors were dropped real quick to the mat, with Kate's knees landing on Hugh's shoulders, which I'm sure a lot of blokes would not complain about if they were in Hugh Jackman's shoes, am I right, lads? And after shooting, at the time Hugh Jackman had said that this was the most stunt work that he ever did for a film. The multiple monsters in the film got a massive makeover for Van Helsing in 2004 thanks to Industrial Light and Magic. We'll start with Frankenstein. Now Frankenstein was pivotal to the plot, but the makers of the film wanted to make sure that when you saw Frankenstein on the big screen, you already know it's Frankenstein. Frankenstein was basically 90% prosthetics and makeup with some added CGI post-production. They kept the similar details from the original with the flat head, bolts in the neck and shoes worn, but with an updated twist. Actor Charlotte Hensel spent around 6 hours a day in the makeup chair playing Frankenstein, which he labelled as a high responsibility, and about 9 to 10 pieces of prosthetics were used just for the top of his head, including some glass pieces which represented Frankenstein's brain and heart, along with leg stilts and a big bodysuit. The Wolfman was mainly a use of blending the human form with CGI for the werewolf transformation scenes. Will Kemp, who plays Vulcan, is it Vulcan or Falcon? Anyway, Will Kemp has a background in dancing, using his skills in his performance for the movements of when he starts transforming into a werewolf, and the rest was done with ILM. The filmmakers decided to change how the werewolf transforms in Van Helsing. Instead of the traditional way in other films where the hair and body would grow out, instead they came up with the idea of ripping his skin off during the wolf transformation, which is equal parts cool and equal parts gross. The 3 brides of Dracula were not only written to be sexy and beautiful like in the past, but also to be able to perform badass action scenes, and each bride has a different personality. According to the special effects team, the brides were actually the toughest to design due to the amount of questions on how to create them. The designs had to come up with ideas of making 3 brides wicked, scary, but beautiful at the same time. They used the idea of having the clothing that the brides wear as part of their transformation, where the brides were photographed in the costumes and designed from there. The actresses were also cast in plaster and digitally scanned to make 3D doubles to work with their human and monster form. They even filmed scenes and used stock animation doubles while the brides were in practical makeup and blue screen to combine the scenes together. And now let's get to Dracula. While Dracula's look and design was updated for Van Helsing, one question arose was how to update the transformation of him as a bat. The designers came up with the idea to transform him into a giant bat while adding a bit of a hellbeast element to him. Summers wanted to stray away from making him look like a traditional bat, where the ideas were to combine a bat and a demon to make a hellbeast design which we get in the film. It was a hard-working process for the scenes with Dracula's transformation, which involved a lot of animation and technical work. And as a bonus fact, the Mr. Hyde fight scenes were used with animatics prior to creating the action scenes to get the idea of what the scene was going to look like. The designer said Mr. Hyde was inspired by a British backstreet thugs who would be drinking at the pub all night who would want to bash the crap out of you, which I'm guessing may not be too different from today's pub drinking culture. They even used Charlotte Hensel, who played Frankenstein, as a stand-in while wearing a helmet with Hyde's head to use as a reference of the height and use a mocap suit for the animation. Meanwhile, Robbie Coltrane was brought in to provide the voice and modelled his face to use the facial expressions and designs for Mr. Hyde. So that's what Hagrid's up to during the Hogwarts summer holidays. But now here's the part where I give my personal review after a rewatch. Now, before a lot of people in the comments have a bit of a tantrum about my opinion, I'm proud to say I actually like this movie. It's one of my favourite guilty pleasure films and I have it in my physical media collection. Now I know it's not perfect, but I saw this when I was 10 years old and it's technically the first horror movie that made me love and appreciate the horror genre. But of course, now that I'm much older and seen this film with adult eyes, I'm going to be critical about the bad, but positive about the good. Now, the problem I do have with this movie is that there are way too many monsters to keep track of in this movie. I like each update of the Universal monsters in this movie. I like Dracula's transformation into a giant bat that looks like a certain Batman character. Frankenstein's look is solid, and the werewolves are possibly the coolest werewolf designs I have seen in a movie. But when adding in Dracula's brides, Igor, Jekyll and Hyde, it's just too much. Especially if you're wanting to make sequels, and don't worry, we'll get to that. It just feels wasted. I mean, just having Dracula and the brides in one, Frankenstein in another, and the Wolfman in the third film, like, there's a trilogy right there. There were even talks of having the creature from the Black Lagoon make a cameo to tease for the next film, and yeah, I'm glad they didn't do that, because they learnt from their mistakes for the sequel and it's better than The Empire Strikes Back. There are some CGI shots that have not aged well. Like a majority of the scenes that are not in Transylvania, like Paris and the Vatican, are obvious green screen. Some scenes involving the CGI monsters haven't aged well either, like the vampires poking out their fangs with the mummy mouth. That would not surprise me if that was reused stock animation. The monsters' CGI can look very off sometimes when standing next to the human characters, and yes, it's obvious that vampires, werewolves and Frankensteins aren't real. Hold your comments at the end. But comparing the special effects from the same people that made the first Mummy movie back in 1999, Van Helsing's CGI is a bit of a downgrade. But then again, we did get the Mummy Returns in between these movies. But another problem the film has, and it happens when you have too many characters, and that the plot is all over the place. Now, I do like the story of Van Helsing travelling to Romania to fight monsters, but cramming as many movie monsters as possible in one movie, there's just too much going on. Like, okay, so the first 15 minutes, we see Dr. Frankenstein creating life and Dracula is introduced as the villain. And Van Helsing just killed Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay, so far so good. Then Van Helsing must go to Transylvania to protect Anna, who is the last family member in her bloodline. Anna's brother is a werewolf now after he fell off a cliff earlier in the movie. Dracula is trying to bring weird vampire children to life to raise an army, and I wonder what that looks like. Somehow Dracula has history with Van Helsing. Frankenstein is alive and is the key to bringing life because he's basically a giant generator. Van Helsing becomes a werewolf, but don't worry, because a werewolf is the only thing that can kill Dracula, even though Dracula uses werewolves as henchmen. And there's a cure for being a werewolf, because of course there's a fucking cure. Also, the werewolves somehow still have pants after ripping their clothing and skin off. But everything gets explained and everything works out okay. Kind of. Like, you can have multiple monsters in one film and make it work, but it's a lot for a movie that has a runtime of just over 2 hours. Now, as I merge into the things I like about this movie, I've seen another main complaint from people who have seen this film are the accents and the line deliveries are not great. Now, they can come across a bit cringe sometimes, but personally, I think it adds some charm and camp to the film.
Too bad. So sad. Did I scare you?
But despite the problems this film has, I feel it's a movie that's just silly fun that you can just pop on the telly and not have a care in the world about the negatives. Now, I think Van Helsing has some cool creature designs, like Dracula and the three brides turning into giant bats looking terrifying and menacing. The werewolf designs look so cool and are my personal favourite werewolf look. Like, Van Helsing is the reason werewolves are my favourite horror movie creatures. And the Frankenstein monster looks terrific considering he's about 90% prosthetic costume and is a fun performance by Charlotte Hensel. Igor is just a wimpy little henchman that cops a lot of shit. The dwargy henchmen in Dracula's castle are so fucking weird. I just love it. The cast, I think, fit well into this movie and look like they're just having such a fun time.
I give you Van Halen!
I like the pairing of Van Helsing and Carl, who are basically James Bond and Q going to fight monsters. Oh yeah, and you can tell there are so many James Bond elements in this movie, with the Vatican as MI6, the gadgets and weapons, and stopping a villain from taking over the world with some Batman thrown in. Like, Hugh Jackman as Van Helsing is a great fit for the role and is rocking some Fabio hair over there. I love seeing Kate Beckinsale as Anna Valeris fighting monsters as a human this time around, considering she played a vampire in the Underworld films. I love Carl the Friar as the scared quartermaster who was basically forced to go with Van Helsing, and that running joke of people thinking he's a monk.
Actually, I'm still just a friar. I can curse all I want. Damn it.
But Richard Roxburgh as Dracula is my favourite portrayal of the famous vampire. Just those moments of acting calm and charming to just snapping at any moment.
I give to you Van Helsing!
Also, bloody Hagrid himself, Robbie Coltrane, as the voice of Mr. Hyde and delivering lines while chomping on a cigar. Just an absolute gentleman. Now, while I find the Paris and the Vatican scenes very noticeable, the Transylvania sets and designs look so good. The sets just really pop and suit the setting of the film. Plus, we can't talk about Van Helsing without mentioning the score. Like, that sound of the acoustic guitar and the opera singing just fucking slaps. I think I listened to the Van Helsing theme song more than the Herald of Darkness song from Alan Wake 2. This is the type of song you just play in the background to hype yourself up. Or in this case, on your way to beat the shit out of Dracula while you're a motherfucking werewolf, which is an awesome scene to watch. Nothing like seeing Dracula absolutely shitting himself while trying to run away like a little bitch. Also, the filmmakers just straight up kill Anna Valeris at the end of the movie while Van Helsing is still an uncontrollable werewolf and accidentally spear tackles her like he's Bill fucking Goldberg. The movie just didn't give a fuck about giving Van Helsing a love-happy ending. All he gets is a cure for the werewolf curse, a Viking funeral and family reunion for the Valeras in heaven, Frankenstein sails into the distance, and Van Helsing and Carl ride into the sunset to set up for the next film, which has been regarded as one of the greatest sequels ever made and is totally 100% real. Now look, I know this movie isn't worthy at the Oscars, but this is just a fun movie to watch if you want to see some monsters getting absolutely wrecked by a couple of the most sexiest monster hunters while yelling their thoughts and prayers.
Hello, Gabriel.
But anyway, that's basically my thoughts on Van Helsing. Let's see what the critics and fans think. Oh, it's bad. It's real bad no matter how much you love this movie. So I'll let Obi-Wan Kenobi take over.
Oh, not good.
Van Helsing was heavily panned by critics with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 24%, but with a mixed audience score of 57%. Critics have labelled the film as a hollow creature feature that suffers from CGI overload. James Bernanelli of ReelViews gave an extremely negative review, rating the film half a star out of 4 and calling it the worst would-be summer blockbuster since Battlefield Earth. Ooh, that's a bit harsh. Everyone's favourite film critic Roger Ebert surprisingly gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, and stating at the outset, we may fear Summers is simply going for FX overkill. But by the end, he has somehow succeeded in assembling all his monsters and plot threads into a high voltage climax. Van Helsing is silly, spectacular, and fun. Guess Roger Ebert can love a fun and silly movie after all. Fans, on the other hand, it's pretty divided. I've posted on movie pages and groups on social media about Van Helsing, and I'm surprised with the amount of people who love this movie. Some who have it as a so bad it's good film, and some who just don't genuinely like it. It does surprise me that Van Helsing is part of a lot of 90s and early 2000s childhoods of people who are just in their late 20s and early 30s like myself. Maybe it's either the same feel as the Mummy films, or it's just a cool looking movie that a lot of kids and teens watched in 2004. As for the box office, with a budget of $160 to $170 million, sorry, what? Did they have a spit roast and caviar banquet in the catering or something? The film ended up making $300.2 million at the box office. The film earned $51 million at number 1 during the opening weekend on May 7th to 9th, 2004. The film eventually grossed over $300 million worldwide, of which $120 million of it was from the US. Van Helsing just managed to break even, but wasn't enough for Universal Pictures to see it as a successful film. As for the marketing and merchandise, which was bloody everywhere in the lead up to the film's release, if you couldn't get enough of Van Helsing until the next film, don't worry, there was plenty of spin-offs to check out which expanded the adventure. An animated prequel called Van Helsing: The London Assignment was released on DVD to tie in with the movie's release. The prequel takes place before the events of the film, focusing on Van Helsing's mission to try and stop Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from terrorizing London. There was also a Jack the Ripper subplot thrown in as well, because it was 1800s London, of course. The animated prequel also has Hugh Jackman, David Wellham, and Robbie Coltrane as the voice cast to reprise their roles from the Van Helsing main film, and has Harley Quinn herself and voice acting legend Tara Strong as a young Queen Victoria in the animated film. The short film received mostly positive reviews, with some critics noting it to be a significant improvement from the original film.
You've only got one way out of this.
I know.
There is also a one-shot comic book published by Dark Horse Comics titled Van Helsing from Beneath the Rue Morgue that follows Van Helsing on a self-contained adventure that occurs during the events of the film, just after the death of Jekyll and Hyde in Paris but before Van Helsing returns to Rome. In the adventure, Van Helsing deals with Dr. Monroe and his hybrid mutants. A Van Helsing video game would be released on the same day as the film for PlayStation 2, Xbox and Game Boy Advance. The game follows a similar plot to the film, has gameplay similar to Devil May Cry, and the PS2 and Xbox versions feature the voice talents of many of the actors from the film, including Hugh Jackman and Richard Roxburgh, reprising their Van Helsing and Dracula roles. The game received mixed reviews for the Xbox and PlayStation version, while the Game Boy Advance version received negative reviews. A toy line for Van Helsing was released with a series of action figures titled Van Helsing Monster Slayer. The toy line was released by Jakks Pacific, which included major characters from the film with play features and extras, including accessories, monsters, and play sets like Dracula's castle. Van Helsing was released on DVD in October of 2004. Hey, just in time for Halloween. How lovely. Some versions include just the featured film or a 2-disc special edition, which included behind the scenes, a history of Van Helsing, explore Dracula's castle, outtakes, and even a demo of the Van Helsing video game if you had an Xbox. Sorry to all you PlayStation loyalists out there. The film would get a Blu-ray and 4K treatment, which included limited editions, slipcovers, and steelbooks. Now before we wrap this up, let's talk about the Van Helsing sequel originally planned, and reboots of the Monster universe that Universal Pictures won't stop making. Now, I've been teasing throughout the video about a Van Helsing sequel, but I bet a lot of you are thinking if I went a bit mental and questioning, did Van Helsing have a sequel? Well, sorry, but computer says no. Van Helsing was intended to start a series of Van Helsing adventure movies which would potentially turn into a trilogy. However, due to the negative reviews and the box office returns were far below expectations, all plans for a sequel were dropped within several days of the film's opening. A spin-off television series was pitched to NBC called Transylvania. The show was originally to feature a Wild West sheriff taken to Europe to battle monsters, with occasional guest appearances by Hugh Jackman as Van Helsing. The series idea was eventually scrapped partly due to the makeup, effects, and shooting locations in Romania would have been too expensive, and partly because of the film's opening weekend box office as mentioned earlier. And yes, there is a TV show called Van Helsing that ran for 5 seasons, but it's not related to the Monsters universe or the Van Helsing film. I mentioned it, alright? As for the reboots, in May 2012, Universal Pictures announced a reboot of Van Helsing with Alex Kurtzman to produce a modern reimagining and Tom Cruise to star as the title character and producer. But the idea was eventually scrapped, and instead in 2016, a reboot of the Monsters universe called The Dark Universe was announced with a cast photo posted online. The Dark Universe would start with Tom Cruise starring in Alex Kurtzman's The Mummy, which was released in June 9, 2017. Following a poor critical and financial reception to the film, Universal restricted their plans for rebooting adaptations of their classic monsters to be standalone in nature. But however, by December 2020, a reboot of Van Helsing was back in development. Julius Avery was hired as director, in addition to doing a rewrite with the original script by Eric Pearson. James Wan was attached to serve as producer, and the project will be a joint production venture between Universal Pictures and Atomic Monster. Now, I will say, Van Helsing 2004 is just an absolute time capsule of a movie. Whether if you love it or hate it, if you watched this movie as a kid in 2004, chances are the movie would have started your love with zombies, werewolves, or vampires. Or the Underworld series. Maybe Blade would have started it too. Or Twilight. Look, you know what I mean. But Van Helsing is an example of how too much in one film doesn't help start a franchise. But after the critical and financial flop that was The Mummy 2017, it was time to go back to the drawing board. Which is a lesson that bloody took a while for Universal Pictures to learn. And it has been proven that there are great films with modern updates featuring these classic monsters and characters since they have been on the public domain and free to use for filmmakers for decades. But it seems that Universal Pictures is now on the right track thanks to director Leigh Whannell's films like The Invisible Man in 2020 and their next monster film Wolfman, which is highly anticipated in 2025. And hey, if Wolfman is another hit that the Monsters universe needed, then maybe Van Helsing should get another chance to shine in a new and improved film. But let me know your thoughts on Van Helsing 2004, and let me know if there's any horror movies you would like for me to cover. I'll add them to the list. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.
I'd say that's earned him a drink.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do want to see more videos like this, don't forget to hit that notification button. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if there's a movie that you guys would like for me to look at, feel free to comment down below. Until then, I'm As the Pop Culture Viking, and always love pop culture.